very glad that you're here with us for this Heuermann Lecture. This is the second Heuermann Lecture of the 2022-2023 academic year. This lecture is being held in conjunction with the 2023 Water for Food Global Conference that's hosted by the Doherty Water for Food Global Institute. Heuermann Lectures in the Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources focus on providing and sustaining enough food, natural resources, and renewable energy for the world's people, and on securing the sustainability of rural communities and rural people across the world. Our work in this space is vital to ensuring water and food security and sovereignty around the globe. These Heuermann Lectures are made possible through a generous gift from Keith and Norma Heuermann from Phillips, Nebraska. We're joined today by their son, Scott. Scott, thank you. Let's give Scott, Norma, and Keith a round of applause. So the format for today's lecture be pretty straightforward. Today, and I'll introduce our guest here in a moment, we have the president and CEO of Land O'Lakes, Beth Ford, and we have Tiffany Hang-Moss, the dean of the College of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources here at UNL. This will be some remarks from Beth, followed by a fireside chat facilitated by Tiffany. There's a standing microphone, and I was here earlier today for the plenary session, so I know that the participants in the conference know the deal. When we open this up for Q&A, please make your way to the back of the room in queue and ask your question. Since there's only 2 of them and 409 of you, please, it would be great, just name, rank, serial number, or who you are, where you're from. That would be wonderful to give a little bit of context to Beth and to Tiffany. For those that are watching online, you can submit your questions via the online form. They'll pop up on Tiffany's device, and she'll be able to ask your questions along the way. So without further ado, let me introduce Dean Tiffany Hang-Moss. Tiffany was named Dean of the College of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources in 2018. You'd think I'd remember that, being the person who appointed her. She served as the interim for the college for nearly 18 months. In her role as dean, Tiffany has provided leadership for the development and implementation of multiple academic degree credentials and digital badges, the college's graduate education framework, the first education compact focused on any subject, but in particular agriculture and natural resources here in Nebraska, and the college's student success roadmap that is completely aligned with UNL's strategic plan, our UNL 2025 plan, where every person and every interaction matters. Since joining the University of Nebraska-Lincoln as a faculty member in 2001, Tiffany has been active in teaching and learning, research and discovery, and extension, engagement, and outreach. She has co-authored over 95 refereed, peer-reviewed teaching and research articles and has secured over $50 million in teaching and outreach grants and $9 million in research funds. Would you join me in welcoming Dean Tiffany Hang-Moss? Beth Ford is president and CEO of Land O'Lakes. Beth Ford serves as president and chief executive officer of Land O'Lakes, a Fortune 200 food production and agribusiness company that is also a century-old farmer-owned cooperative. Land O'Lakes operates Land O'Lakes Dairy Foods, Purina Animal Nutrition, Winfield United, and Truterra, and has operations in more than 60 countries. Ms. Ford joined Land O'Lakes in 2011 and has held a variety of roles across all businesses. She is a passionate advocate on behalf of farmers and rural America with the goal of connecting people, particularly in urban areas, to farmers and rural communities who grow their food. In addition, she is the convener of the American Connection Project to help bridge the digital divide. Beth's 35-year career spans 6 industries at 7 companies. She is a board member on the board of directors for Starbucks and has previously served on the board of directors of BlackRock, Inc. She also serves on the board of directors for the Business Roundtable and the Columbia University Business School Deming Center Board of Advisors. She recently was inducted into the Supply Chain Hall of Fame by the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals. I had to practice that one a couple times. And received a Doctor of Humane Letters honorary degree from Iowa State University in 2022. Please join me in welcoming Beth Ford.
Well, thank you, Dr. Boehm, for the introduction, and welcome to those in attendance today here at Nebraska Innovation Campus, as well as those that are joining us online. It's great to see the turnout. Ms. Ford, thank you again for accepting our invitation to lead our discussion today. It's truly an honor for our institution to host a distinguished leader such as yourself in the area of global water and food security. As Dr. Boehm mentioned, our format for today will be a fireside chat followed by a Q&A session with the audience. Ms. Ford will focus her comments on talking about why water is the top of her priority list, initiatives that are currently underway, as well as the need for a long-term comprehensive water sustainability strategy. So Beth, to kick things off, let's watch a video that you and your team created that provides us a glimpse into Land O'Lakes.
Great.
We're always told to keep our heads up and never stop dreaming. But that doesn't mean you have to look up to find a bright future. 'Cause up there are only the stars. Those shiny, pretty things that make for nice dreams and horoscopes, but are too distant to really help or care. We dream too. We know that dreams have to be earned through hard work. So, when you see us keeping our heads down, we're not letting them hang in despair. It's how we dream. Because we believe endless possibilities are right beneath our feet, under our noses, all around us. Look to the stars for too long and you'll get a stiff neck in the case of lost time. But reach down and you'll find everything you'll ever need for a better tomorrow. For everyone. The land that made us. The soil that feeds us. The roots, the ground connect and grow us. The strength to do what we have to. The inspiration to do it better. Kids, we want to be astronauts when we grow up. But once we're grown up, we're proud we became farmers and friends of farmers. Because astronauts can't take billions of people to a better world. But we can bring a better world to billions of people. So, let's keep our hopes high and our heads down. Let's boldly go toward the future. Together, we are rooted in tomorrow.
So Beth, the video, Rooted in Tomorrow, is inspiring and provides us with an overview of Land O'Lakes and its place in the world. Many people know Land O'Lakes from your butter and other dairy products, but the video tells the story of Land O'Lakes. It's so much more. Please tell us a little bit more about your organization.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be here today for this important conversation. And that really is what I hope this will be, is a conversation, which I think is so important. Most people know Land O'Lakes because of our butter. And I say, We love that butter. It's terrific. Get busy with it. It's baking season, and we make cheese too and other things. But actually, that is less than a third of our business. What you would have seen there was that we're involved in production agriculture as well. Purina, animal nutrition is one of our businesses. Winfield Solutions, Winfield Technologies. We work through our local retail owners. We have a reverse ownership model owned by producers, dairy farmers, and our local retailers. So we work through them, working directly with growers. So we are both a marketing cooperative and a supply cooperative. We also have Truterra, our newest business, and it's focused on sustainable production and sustainable production practices. So that's a focus area. We work internationally. We have businesses in South Africa, Mexico, Canada, China, elsewhere. And then we have an NGO, Venture 37, where we're working with smallholder farmers, really primarily in West Africa, but in other areas of the world. I think we're right now doing some work in Haiti. So we are unique in that we serve the entire value chain. We have hundreds of manufacturing facilities, plants, distribution centers, et cetera, but we see the whole food value chain from farm level all the way to retail, and it is probably a little bit different. I think we sneak up on people, right? Everybody knows our butter business. They talk about the dairy business, and we say, yes, we're proud of our brand, we're proud of that, but we're much broader than that.
Perfect, thank you. So since taking the helm of Land O'Lakes in 2018, what is the thing that has surprised you the most about your organization, but also the agricultural industry in general?
There's so many layers to that. What I most recognize, I grew up in Iowa, but I did not grow up on a farm. And I continually say I don't think detasseling corn one summer makes me an ag expert. But what I, of course, recognized was rural communities. I grew up in an ag state. But I don't think know about the complexity of the food supply chain and the interconnected nature of it, the fragility of the food supply chain. And I think that that's important. Of the resilience that I see from farmers, the joy I see from farmers. I mean, there's so many layers to what it is that I've seen. What I would note most directly, and why I think this lecture is important and why I speak as frequently as I can on these topics, is that there's a lack of understanding broadly, and especially here in the United States, about the fragility of the food supply, about why this is critical. I say food security is national security, and we need to consider that in our investments against multiple issues that will secure our food supply. And then globally, we are a production concentration center for the world. We stabilize geopolitically different economies, different areas of the world from the production that happens in a state like Nebraska. And we have to think of it that way, and why it's so critically important. We see the instability globally. We saw what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine, and we saw all sorts of volatility. And where does that grain go? That goes into North Africa, one of the most food insecure areas of the world. So, the answer to that question has a lot of layers for me. I can talk about, what's it like the first day you're the CEO? We're like, who are all these constituents? What's going on? Trying to figure different things out. But most directly for this discussion, I would say what I have found and what I have found in my time at Land O'Lakes is a multitude of both opportunity and issue, joy and challenge. And I think you saw that evidenced in that piece that you saw earlier.
Perfect. So for Nebraska, agriculture is the #1 industry driving our state's economy. So we think a lot about the success of our farmers and ranchers across the state and really on a global platform. And so what will be key to ensuring America's farmers and ranchers are set up for success going forward?
There are 3 primary areas that I have my team focused on right now. Now, there are a lot of other elements that we could bring up. We could bring up financing, new growers. We could bring up a lot of different things. But last year, over the last number of years, we talked about technology enablement in rural communities. And for agriculture, yes. But I remind everybody, the majority of farmers are families, and farms are still family owned, and they're trying to raise a family in rural communities that don't have access to technology. So the discussion of the American Connection Project, that we were focusing on closing this digital divide, on making sure there was investment in technology. That was a primary issue, right? We know we need that because we want rural vibrancy. We want to support these families, and that's how I think the responsibility for us is to support these families. But now past that, and we're still in implementation. We can't have gotten to the 1 yard line, and we can't put it over because we can't get to implementation. So technology is still important with the greatest enabler of our time. Technology enablement with broadband and other access. But there are 3 other areas that I think play a part of this discussion. Number 1 was water. And so that before even this discussion came to the fore, I said we must focus on water. Fresh water demand will outstrip supply by 2030 by 56% globally. And water is critical to production agriculture. It's critical to communities and to life. And my concern has been that what I see is water policy, water issues are very local, but they have global implications. Major challenges, especially with agriculture and the food supply. So while it is appropriate and correct for us to talk about local level investment and policies and politics around that, what we have to do, and I believe, is elevate the conversation a bit. And certainly as I'm looking at a federal investment, how do we make sure that we have the right investment for industries like food production that is protective for all citizens, no matter where they are. So, water policy, water infrastructure investment, a number of those areas that we know are critical. The second area that I have the team focus on is ag research funding. Here we are at the great university, and we're at 1970s level of funding for ag research. It's unacceptable. It leaves us less secure. We have had consolidation in basic manufacturers and R&D over the last number of years, and now we really have one large basic in the country, and that's Corteva. So private industry coupled with public funding is important, and we have to think of it that way. So on that last example I was using in terms of technology and broadband investment, that was a $65 billion invested in this infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and it's that level of transformational funding that is necessary to close a gap like that. Similarly, we have to think of it that way for ag research funding. And why ag research funding? That's about new seed technology, it's about applied research, and they play together. The drought-resistant and drought-tolerant seeds allow us to be productive and meet this grand challenge of feeding 9.5 to 10 billion people by 2050. And by that time, by 2050, we have to produce more food, create more food than the last 8,000 years combined. That's the challenge. Water is central to that. Ag research is absolutely critical to it. We're in Farm Bill negotiation time. I think it's terrific that some of those conversations are coming up, but I fear that it will not be enough. It won't be transformational funding because there's always, you're trying to divide the pie. There are a lot of priorities. It's not like they're going to give more money on the Farm Bill, and yet we need something that is transformational. And then the third area of focus for my team in this challenge is immigration reform. Farm Worker Modernization Act has passed the House twice on a bipartisan basis. And I'm not a politician. I don't do politics, I do policy. And when I'm in DC, I talk to both sides of the aisle about what are the enablers that are critical, what do I see? And this is one that we get violent agreement. There is no disagreement about the necessity for farm workers. We're 2.5 million workers short. 20% of the produce in the Central Valley of California doesn't get harvested because there's not enough labor. We get millions of acres that don't get planted. Carl Dickinson is here. He's a member of our cooperative. He's on the board. He runs CVA here in Nebraska, and he'll say, you need to make sure that they understand we're in crisis in terms of available labor. And it's not as though farmers or local retailers aren't raising wages. They are. It's just these are jobs. 70% of workers or more in ag labor are foreign-born. And so we need to address this gap in terms of available labor because, again, these play together. Our ability to protect ourselves, food security is national security. We have to think of that level of prioritization. And so those are the three areas the team is in. I could talk about a number of other things. Housing availability in rural communities, education, the closure of rural hospitals, food deserts. I mean, there's a multitude of issues, but centrally and most aligned with what we're going to talk about here today, I would say those three issues are areas my team is targeting.
Great, thank you. And we do appreciate your support for ag research for the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. We represent the land-grant flagship R1 institution for the state of Nebraska, and so that funding is incredibly important so that we can continue to advance the work that we do here to serve the state and beyond. So thank you for that. Mm-hmm. How would you describe the unprecedented change that's occurred in our collective relationship between food and water?
Well, again, we've talked about the fact that we're going to have a water shortage, and this is a near-end problem. This isn't 100 years from now, right? So these are near-end challenges and long-term challenges that we need to be concerned about. You see this increased volatility in the climate, whether it was torrential rain. So just last year, in the fall, I was with our members in the Central Valley, and we were talking about, dramatic drought condition, and they're still in drought. But did you see how many atmospheric rivers there were that came and hit the West Coast? What are they, 300% of the snowpack in the Sierra Nevada? I mean, now you've got this dramatic other change. Here in the state of Nebraska, you've had drought conditions. In Kansas, major drought conditions. So the change is that, first of all, the water infrastructure in most states was not built for the current year. It doesn't have the capacity. Think of the population growth that has occurred during this time. Think of the expansion that has occurred in terms of development in urban areas, et cetera. So we don't have the infrastructure, and we have much more dramatic volatility in our climate, both in drought and in things like atmospheric rivers, or in Iowa, derechos, or things like that. So, what has been the change? Well, on the one hand, I'm going to shout out the fact that you had development like GMOs. That increased yields 25%. That has been protective and helpful. But we are coming to the tail end of the help that those can provide in terms of increasing our production. We're supposed to increase production, say 1.5% to 2% or so, to meet this challenge by 2050 of the population growth. We're trailing that number because, again, of lack of investment in ag research. And again, by 2030, this demand outstripping supply. The U.S. government did some research, and it said yields would drop 10%. This is up in the upper Midwest. These are production, some are, as we say, the good dirt, the best production areas. And so the change, I don't know that it's as much of a change as much as the dramatic volatility, the lack of investment, the lack of consistent investment in infrastructure, and then add to that the lack of research funding to offset that, more drought-tolerant seeds and everything. That is the position we're in currently.
Perfect. Well, Beth, I know that we have some undergraduate and graduate students that are attending today. So let's talk a little bit about what role do students and the next generation of ranchers and farmers need to play?
Well, first of all, I'm grateful for people to be here to take the time and to have a conversation, because that's what we need to do. So what do we need what do folks need to do, and younger folks? Well, we have a couple of things that we do. At my company, we have something called the Global Food Challenge. And the Global Food Challenge, we try to excite people not in production agriculture and in agriculture to get involved in solving this grand challenge. So they can apply, they can become, they can, I guess, win, if you will, and then they go and we work with them. They come into DC with us and talk about policy. They work with a cooperative. They understand what the business is. We send them to Africa. They work there for a couple weeks to understand what production is in other areas of the country. What we're trying to do is what I would say, no matter whether you're at the University of Nebraska or anywhere, we need other innovators, other younger folks involved in agriculture and in the food supply. We need to get them excited about that. We need all innovators. That's number one. Number two, we need their voice. We need their passion. And when I talk with my team, I said, we don't have the kind of money to write a check to solve this problem. We can't, just write some massive margins and we're gonna solve this. But what we do have is our voice and our intention. We have an ability to make it obvious. As I said, we have a process, awareness, advocacy, action. And we must raise our voice to make sure that people understand this is a really fraught situation, a fragile situation, and we need others involved in this. The other thing is that we try to be in, and I would say younger people here in the university, farmers, ranchers, we try to be in different rooms. My observation about the industry is we tend to be together and we shout out, like folks don't understand, and then we stomp our feet and everything, and we're yelling at each other ourselves, right? We need to be in other rooms. We need to be in the rooms where people don't understand or have never been exposed to or whatever, so that we can have others with us. When I'm in DC, there are 435 House positions, 35 are aligned with ag and rural. We need others with us. We need others with us to help them understand why this is in their best interest, to understand the challenge and to advocate for investment and for advocate for supportive policies. When I talk with them, I said we must and we should want the farmer to be profitable. We should want the investment for the farmer to be secure. It is in all of our best interests. So, there's so many ways that innovators, that farmers, that ranchers, that younger folks here at the university could be involved, but most directly, I would say, please use your voice. Be engaged with local policymakers. Help others understand why this is critically important to our security. Food security is national security, and we need to help folks understand that that is an immediate issue. This is not something 100 years from now. This is an immediate issue.
Okay, so building on that, using your voice, let's dive a little bit deeper into the topic of conservation around water. So share with us, why are you using your voice and the platform of your organization to elevate the conversation on water?
Well, obviously, we're a farmer-owned cooperative, so here we are, and we're talking about this issue. It's of primary importance to our members and to their families and to their communities. Now, that would be an obvious answer, but more to the point, I think we have the good fortune, because we are a branded goods company, people understand Land O'Lakes, right? Oh, I understand. No matter what city they're in, policymakers, Land O'Lakes, that's easy. Versus someplace else where maybe more only in the ag community, they understand who that company is or who those leaders are. Because we're in kind of a unique position where we are both a branded goods business and we go right back to the farmer and are owned by farmers, and the board are farmers and ag retailers, et cetera. We are in a unique position to put voice to these issues. So I sit on the Business Roundtable Board of Directors. I'm in DC a lot with policymakers, and because of that branded goods opportunity and brand, that we get those invitations to be there and involved and engaged in those communities. So, the cooperative itself, I could say, well, we're here because it's in our interest of our business and our farmers, but I think that's a shortcut. And in reality, we're here because I think the responsibility of leadership in this industry and the responsibility for communities, for agriculture, but also for food security here, demands that you put voice to these things.
Okay, so droughts have had a devastating impact on crop, livestock, and dairy production in key regions in the last few years, including Nebraska. Additionally, Nebraska experienced historic flooding in recent history, and California is dealing with that now in early 2023. How is your organization handling the challenges related to the current drought, and how are they preparing for the possibility of more extreme weather and increasing climate variability in the future?
Well, I mentioned from the start that one of our businesses is Truterra, our sustainable production business. First of all, I think farmers are so resilient. I'm so impressed with farmers, ag retailers. I mean, just the amount of resilience, the fact that, dairy production, oftentimes in dairy production, you make money maybe 1 out of 7 years. And so if they're profitable and they put money in their pocket, I mean, just amazing resilience. Oftentimes what I hear is, they're large scale. Well, they're large scale because they were able to offset, and they invested, and they were able to offset these lower commodity markets or the things that were challenging, and we should be grateful. We should be grateful and not, try to demonize or characterize something, as not, not a good thing. So how are they thinking about this, and how are they dealing with this over time, and how are we going to think about this over the long term? I think, we've talked about policy, we've talked about advocating for ag research, we've talked about, the resilience of the American farmer, but Truterra is about sustainable, it's about that transition. Oftentimes you hear people say, tomorrow I want us to go all plant-based, and we're not going to do, there's this immediacy. Tomorrow we're going to change. This demonization or this characterization of good food, bad food, I think is very dangerous in a food insecure environment. Our Truterra business is really about practice change. It's about technology. Our Truterra Insight Engine has over 1 trillion data points. We work with agronomists and their local retailer at helping them with practice change, but also insights about the way that a farmer can make their land more resilient against climate change, and also have improved carbon capture, whatever those, use cover crops, variable rate application of fertilizer, those things that are practice changes. But as I try to explain to other folks, transition costs money. Those things aren't free. We talked about to transition an acre, what is it, $40 to $60 an acre, and that was a couple years ago. It's going to be more now. And so we need to have a data-based insight, a practice change with our agronomists, thus our Truterra Insight business, our Truterra business with the Insight Engine. More recently, we got a grant from the USDA for our climate smart agriculture, and that is really, again, about practice change. And we make a commitment on the number of acres that we can work on to transition with farmers. We're very proud of that, a $90 million plus grant from the USDA. I'm grateful for the Secretary for his investment against this transition. This is a transition industry, just as energy, for instance, is a transition industry, where in order to make those practice changes, the things that are more sustainable over the long term, we have to invest, and we have to invest through that transition.
So now we're going to shift. We're going to talk a little bit about the Farm Bill. So as you're aware, Congress is working on the Farm Bill
That'll be
this
fun.
year. Yeah. What opportunities do you see in that potential legislation to help advance some of the water conservation and sustainability goals that we've talked about?
Well, I talked about ag research funding, and I think that is going to be central. We've been trying to talk to, Department of Interior. We've been talking to, governors and everything about investment in water, infrastructure, et cetera. I see the president more recently has been working on the Colorado River issue on the western states and trying to get some agreement on allocation of water. So what are the opportunities in the Farm Bill? I think the primary one will be some ag research funding to address these areas. I mean, we need some of the basic programs, stabilize, some stabilization through, security programs, those kinds of things that are basic to a farmer. We have to have those. We have to have crop insurance. We have to have that. So I think that will still be the case. Where I have concern, in addition to the fact that the the pie is not likely to get bigger, is that agriculture sometimes shows up to those negotiations, and the cotton growers are arguing with the corn growers, or arguing with the with cattle and things like that, and they're not making the pie bigger. So I'm not suggesting that we can all march in there together, but I think we'd be a lot more effective if we put it under the framing of food security writ large and said that this is the investment and it will be across all of these areas, and we need basic security programs, basic crop insurance. We need the things that are safety net programs for our farmers, and that should be in everybody's best interest.
So we talked a little bit about some advice for youth. Our future generation is elevating their voice. What other advice would you give youth that are thinking about a career in food and water security?
Well, maybe some youth here will listen to me because, again, in my own home where I have 3 teenagers, they don't do that very frequently. So, I can't convince them to go into it, but maybe you. The reality is, I've worked in 6 industries, in 7 companies. I've worked around the world. And now here I am, year 37 in my career. And I think what a blessing that all of my life's experience have now put me in the most important industry with the most important work of my life. Geez, I wish I was here earlier. The work is so profoundly important. I wake up every day and I'm excited about my day. And even when it's bumpy, because life is bumpy and life is hard sometimes. And that is the game, that is just part of it. I hope what you want to do with your life is work that's meaningful. Not work that's work, but work that's meaningful. My day goes quickly because the challenges are still there, and then you have to hang it up for the night and go at it the next day. So I guess my advice to young people is you have more power and influence than you think, and an ability to make a bigger impact in your life, in your one life. You want to do something, be smarter than me. Don't wait till you're at year 37 in your career to recognize, boy, what a gift. How lucky am I? How fortunate am I to do meaningful work? The only other time in my career that I thought this was so important, I used to be in publishing for Scholastic. That was one of my jobs. I was their COO many years ago. And why? Because that was about literacy in children. And I found, boy, that's something I can really spend some time and be focused on, because that means something. And here again, what a great opportunity to make sure I'm using my time for something that I think is so important. And I also think this industry, there's an intimacy to it versus other industries. I could go somewhere and people know each other. They can talk shorthand, They talk about what's going on in their farm and their crops. They talk about their families. They're invested in their community. I've lived in major urban areas in my life, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and everything. And I always think they want their neighborhood to be like your smaller town, where everybody kind of knows and protects each other. They're invested in each other's success and in their families. What a blessing to be part of that. And so I would suggest to the younger folks in here, if you're looking for a career of excitement, of opportunity, of impact, and you have that energy to make a difference, this is the industry you want to be in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more when I think back about my journey, right? It's the most impactful career is being in the space of food security and feeding the world. So thanks for sharing that inspiration with our youth. We always say that if you're interested in STEM, education, business communication, there's a place for you in agriculture. So I'm also glad to hear that your children don't always listen to you, because I find the same thing for my children too.
Yeah, I try to say just around my own dinner table we don't always agree, so I don't think that's the measure of success.
All right, so with that, we're going to conclude our time with the fireside chat, and we're going to transition into the Q&A session with the audience. So as Dr. Bain mentioned, we have microphones set up in the center aisle here. So if you have a question for Beth, please navigate to one of the microphones. And then those of you that are joining us online, feel free to post a question in the chat.
Great.
So we have our first person. So if you could introduce yourself, and then we'll go into your question, please.
I'm Dale McDermott. I'm an adjunct professor in agronomy and horticulture here, excuse me, and a faculty fellow of the Doherty Water for Food Institute. And my question is, well, you mentioned that the pie is only a certain size for government money, but do you see the possibility that the marketplace might make demands for improved water management in the produce that goes into the foodstuffs to make our potato chips and perhaps butter? Do you see the marketplace providing an additional possibility for funding? I think there are movement in this direction with carbon credits, for example. Might we see something similar for water management?
Yeah, I think what would be productive is public-private partnerships. I think that that's always important. And do you see private industry, driving some of that? I think funding from private industry would be very helpful. Go back to my comment on ag research. Having said that, here in the United States, there's really only one large basic in R&D, and that's Corteva now, because most of the others have been consolidated, Bayer, Monsanto, Syngenta, Chem China. In terms of water infrastructure, because, as I say right now, all policy investment is local and not as much federal, by definition, industries who are impacted by water shortages, I use California as an example, will advocate. Now, what's interesting is that I sit on the BRT board of directors, and I, of course, have raised this topic, and it's so fraught because it's under a framework of urban-rural or rights issues. All of those are not wrong, but we need to elevate the conversation and say, wait a minute, what are the industries that we must make sure have access to water and that we have to invest against volatility? That would be certainly utilities, but agriculture, food supply.
Sure.
And we need to have that framing in all of these conversations. So I would agree with you. Wouldn't it be productive if we have, and we will, have investment? We see here in the state of Nebraska, there'll be some state level funding, and they're local. And I saw here in Lincoln, there was a discussion of a canal and access to the Missouri River. The but I say is the problem with what is the framework of the conversation and what is the scale of the investment, and will it negate some of the other major challenges that are going to happen with climate and with volatility. And some of the investment needs to be base water infrastructure, reservoirs, pipes, things like that, water efficiency, that are both local and national.
What I'm talking about, though, is money that is actually not coming from the government, but coming from the marketplace. So, for example, consider produce that's grown in an Imperial Valley and in California, where there are, in the Central Valley, where there are very serious water issues. Is there any possibility of having produce from those areas being marketed in the grocery store with some sort of incentive that's related to the quality of the water management that goes into the production, so that the consumer actually pays a small increment? And that might provide a much larger funding base for moving forward.
I think Bill Gates had something about the tax on transition industries and talked about the additional expense. You see Europe doing that, by the way. Where if you're bringing your production into no matter what it is, they'll have a climate tax basically against the product. In the Imperial Valley, they do this. Now the question is, are they going to price for it? So oftentimes when I'm asked about what is the level of investment, and or, for instance, are you going to get a carbon credit for that? So is that going to be funded by a private industry because they're going to buy a carbon credit? And or is the marketplace, and this is what you're saying, going to value it at a higher level? And we've not seen that. And there's no clear market signal. When you're looking at produce, you see it for organic, right? Organic, but then organic, that market really came down pretty dramatically, and there was a lot of discussion of whether organic was really organic, but they were shipping in stuff that really wasn't organic, right? That kind of collapsed the market. So what I would see is we've looked at it is there's no evidence yet, and maybe it gets to be the baseline of what the expectation is. That of course you're being sustainable in your production and you're using water well. I could say that same thing on a number of practice changes. I would wish there was more of an investment mindset about how are you going to acquire, what are you acquiring, and then it'll be priced differently, and then this is either climate smart, and that's the way it's been characterized in other markets, climate smart produce, whatever the product is. We've not seen evidence yet of a clean market signal that's elevating it at a level that will be supportive for the kind of investment we're talking about. It's not a wrong thought. It's just not yet scale in the marketplace, and I fear that it's going to get to be just the baseline of expectation.
All right, we'll take our next question.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name is Troy Hoppenjohn. I work for the Millennium Challenge Corporation, a federal government agency here in the U.S. It's great to see so many faces from abroad and to have a guest speaker that understands things from both the private sector side in the U.S. as well as through Venture 37 with your visibility there. I'm curious to know, I'm sure this is an audience that understands that not every lesson that we've learned here through our agricultural economic growth process is applicable to the global spectrum. But I wonder, with your vantage point at such an organization, whether you see lessons that we've maybe learned the hard way here in the U.S. or lessons that we've learned at the global scale that can be addressed from a donor perspective, such as Millennium Challenge or USAID, these large donor agencies. Does that question make sense?
It does. We're partnered with USAID, and we're partnered with the Gates Foundation, for instance, on some investments that we make in specific projects that are applicable in emerging markets or in areas where they're trying to learn about animal genetics or animal husbandry, et cetera. At the same time, when we were in South Africa, we have a business there. I think that they were, at least our team there, was probably ahead of us on biologics. What you'd want is a virtuous partnership, wouldn't you? You'd say, what have you learned on the use of biologics, which is a little bit more grounded in South Africa versus here, and how do we scale that? And at the same time, folks there need to talk about how do they make farmers not just yield improve, but also more profitable. So sometimes when we're working overseas, we're working on things like how do you set up a co-op, right? How do you monetize this? We talk about land rights. We talk about all sorts of different things. How do you market products? We talk about refrigeration, quality standards, food waste. So, and we learned the same way back, on areas of creativity and interest from these other markets.
I guess we started off the day hearing about this complex issue of collective resource management in the California-Colorado River Basin. What types of have you seen any lessons learned about what types of roles these intergovernmental organizations can play in that space? Just sort of piggybacking off of where we started this today. Yeah,
I mean, that one, I feel like every weekend I'm reading another thing on the Colorado River Basin. and water rights that have been there since 1920s, and industry and growth that has occurred, et cetera. And have we learned anything? Well, I'll tell you why I keep saying, when I was in Sacramento, with Governor Newsom's team, I said, it would be really productive if we could have, the governor and the governor here from Nebraska partnering. Unusual voices and partnerships to help everybody understand, because production agriculture is critical in the Central Valley. I use that example not to negate your question about the Colorado River, but what I'm trying to do and recommend is that we elevate the conversation. It is very easy, and I don't want to, that sounds like a negative comment, to be pulled down into the weeds of the conversation. That is still legitimate. I don't think it's not a legitimate conversation about who had the water rights or who's got the land and everything. It's absolutely legitimate, but I fear we're not doing that with context. We have to think of the broader context, because this is such an urgent, near-in issue, and it will continue to be that way. And so the lesson I've learned is, if you allow yourself to be too far down into every weed, you don't make progress at a scale that is impactful and that is of context for the broad challenges, that instead we have to remind people of these broader things that we're talking about. And in some of the projects we do, we see this. For instance, here, sometimes the marketing, anti-marketing against the use of technology in modern agriculture, and to include GMOs, and thus the unwillingness for other governments that have food insecure populations to approve them for use. That is a very risky and sad situation when we know for a fact that would help save lives. That is a concern. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Beth. My name is Chris Boskay. I serve Nebraska's dairy farmers of the state as their executive director of the Nebraska State Dairy Association. And last week I was, or maybe it was the week before last, I was out in Chicago at ADPI, and there was a really, really interesting presentation from Rabobank about the future of dairy production and dairy consumption trends, and looking at the European Union and New Zealand and how they're kind of dropping off due to some extremist activity and some pressures there. And the statement was that the world will be 20 to 30 million metric tons short of dairy production within the next 7 years. And I just was curious how Land O'Lakes is positioning themselves. I know Leprino and AgriPure and Valley Queen and a lot of big integrators within the industry are expanding and trying to grow. And I just was curious. I know Nebraska's last Land O'Lakes dairy producer was Mike Henn, and unfortunately in 2020 he sold his cows, and we would love to have Land O'Lakes back in Nebraska. And so I'd love to hear your talking points on that.
Thanks for the invite.
Hey, and I think you went to Bishop Heelan, right?
I did.
Me too. I'm a Crusader.
Crusaders.
That's right.
So, there's a lot to unpack from that question. First of all, dairy producers have consolidated, I think, 27,000 registered dairy producers now. And I joined Land O'Lakes 10 or 11 years ago. There was well over 100,000. So that industry has consolidated dramatically, yet we still have the same animal numbers, maybe just slightly a little bit more. So it just goes to show you that in order to hold on, go back to my 1 out of 7 years you're making money in general, average, then it tells you how volatile dairy production is and challenging for especially for small producers. I say that we have members that are Amish farmers that we literally go with their paper check to the mailbox. They have maybe 50 head, and then we've got very large scale producers, and we work to support all of them. Now, in terms of the shortage globally, what do we see here domestically is that what has increased in dairy consumption has been around cheese, cheese especially, but dairy proteins are in use in a lot of different formulas. And I see the European, I get this question a lot, what are we doing with Europeans, and asking or requiring them to beef their herd. You see New Zealand having some similar policies, not quite that extreme. In terms of the way we think of it and the way we're helping to position, we continue to work with our members to say what is the market signal that allows them to be profitable for the long term. We look and make sure that they're hedging their risks, that they're looking at long-term investment in robotics so they can address the labor issues. So we're talking about the water issues and everything in a multitude of ways. And at the same time, we're advocating for them for labor, but also for policy support over the long term. Dairy production is strong. Dairy consumption was, never higher than the last couple of years. So while there's a lot of narrative about the demise of dairy, we certainly don't see that overall. We see the industry continues to grow and is productive and effective. The question that we have to continually challenge ourselves with is how can we make sure there's a clean market signal to our dairy producer? How do we help them invest to be protective against their profitability? And then how do we make sure that the policy issues that we know would be supportive, especially when there's inflationary pressure, when there's insurance and dairy margin coverage insurance, et cetera, that we can work with them. Globally, this is a fresh good, right? So, what you have to do is you say, what is the processing that you have to use to transfer or transition dairy production into a finished good? And thus processing investment is critical. Right now, they're looking at the federal order pricing structure, and that's important. My concern is that it's not agile enough with a marketplace that is more dramatically consolidated and has this level of volatility. We're working, as we did with the National Milk Producers Federation, to try to make sure that the pricing at farm gate is reflective of the investments, but also the protein levels and stuff that go into the finished good. Because again, it's not as simple as, well, we can hedge this completely. It's not a very liquid market, no pun intended. And there are so many other variables there that play a part of that, depending on where the producer is, the scale of the producer, the risk management processes. But I think it's 1 in 7 days, maybe more, of dairy production in the United States is exported. So we also want to work on trade and trade issues for dairy. Thanks for the question.
Hi, I'm Sue Latchaw. I'm an unaffiliated wheat breeder. And I wanted to revisit the question about creating pressure for improved water use efficiency for production. We talked about using the marketplace and that's too high a level, but you have suggested that really elevating that conversation is key. And one of the things that you talked about today was how in the conversations around the Farm Bill, what you've seen is a lot of infighting between the commodity groups. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about potentially using that infighting as an opportunity to bring those commodity group voices together and uniting them towards this imperative for water use efficiency, so that instead of it being so localized, maybe we can bring it up regionally, nationally, globally, using those very powerful voices that would come out of the representatives for each commodity crop.
I think that's a terrific idea. I think it's a terrific idea.
So ideas are good, but what do you see in terms of possibilities?
Well,
you've been in the room, and how do you think that could actually be acted out?
Well, that will have to happen through industry organizations. So I'm going to say even within dairy, right? There's different subset groups that may not all be aligned. And so what it takes then is for us to say that what are the industry groups that speak for the different groups, whether it's the cattle producers or hogs or wheat growers or corn growers, and then make urgent this issue with them. And as I say, this is a great idea, and I'm sure Tina's, my chief of staff is over there saying, let's see what we can do. Because the first thing we're trying to do is raise awareness more broadly for this being an issue, that this isn't just a state level issue or a local level issue, this is an industry issue, it is a food security issue. So I would tell you that will have to happen through the industry organizations, one company alone, one person alone. I'm sure the USDA is working on it, but it's not even just USDA. Who do they go to federally? Do they go to the Department of Interior? Who are they talking to that they can address this? Some of it is a states' right issue and everything. So if we're going to talk about the industry, I think you've got a terrific recommendation there. And what we'll need to do is talk more broadly. I'm going to tell you the thing that was closest to that moment. When the Ukraine war started, we went to the industry organizations and we said, listen, we are going to be short food globally. And that was when prices were spiking. What can the industry do immediately to go to the government and say, we want to be part of helping in this situation? And they got together and said, these are the things we could do. We could start to double crop. You need to work the insurance rates because there were a lot of different variables. But the industry did come together because it was a priority issue of urgency. Now, was it executed in the end? Maybe not. But what you did see was the industry at that moment of urgency came together and said, these are the things that are possible. Here's what we need to do to support it. I hope, and I've said this, what I hope we don't do and wait for is a level of crisis before we're finally able to say, now we're going to work together. We cannot do that. We have to continue to raise our voice about why the urgency is right now before we have a food security crisis here in the United States that is tied to our inability to produce. But I like your idea.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Lucas.
Hey, Beth.
Hey. What's
Hi,
up?
Dean Hangmoss.
Lucas, good to see you.
Spicky. Nice to see you guys, too. I'm a grower. I'm really lucky to farm with my family, about 45 minutes north of here. As a farmer, I've participated in the carbon markets through Chutera. And really, I want to know, what is the next thing for water? What's the market asking us as farmers to be involved in? What are they wanting us to do when it comes to water specifically?
It goes back to tying water to what is used to produce food, right? So there was some discussion about, I know that there have been more protective discussions about foreign ownership of land and then thus their use of water here, and then are they exporting their water? So that's one is, what are we thinking about in terms of what is protective? In terms of carbon credits, in our Trutera model, and as you know, we do look at water and water usage as a piece of this. I think what I'm going to tell you is the same thing, and I'm sure you're asking this, and I appreciate for you asking the question. The carbon market is still unsettled. It's an unstructured pricing environment. There's all sorts of private equity money to go in there. There's all sorts of, there's intention, if you have it evidenced by funding that comes in there, but it's unsettled in terms of pricing and then unsettled in terms of policy. Will you be able to use that carbon offset for a company? And so there's no clean answer for you about saying what is the next, because the current situation is so unsettled. I do think that there is energy for it, but I think the first layer of that, because again, most people don't understand there's a real water issue. The first layer of that is all about carbon sequestration and less about water usage.
Ronnie Green, Chancellor here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Thank you, Beth, for being here and for your conversation today. I noticed with great pleasure, I guess, that your emphasis at several points in your conversation was about the need for increase in agricultural sciences and research. And I can reflect back now and think about the last 25 years that we have been making that argument and making it as strongly as we possibly can, all the way to the levels of our federal government across the board. I shared with you earlier, we got the President's Council on Advisors on Science and Technology 12 years ago to say that this was a $25 billion a year problem. And in the meantime, we have seen and continued to see, now China, Brazil, many others around the world far surpass us now in our agricultural research capacity. I wonder if we are using the wrong narrative. And if there is a shift in what that narrative needs to be, that is more like, candidly, what we have seen happen in the health arena, in the National Institutes of Health, which seems to an ag scientist to have unending possibilities for research dollars. So do you have any thoughts about why we might reframe that narrative around the importance and the dire need for investment in agricultural research?
Yeah, I don't know that it's the message, and it may be, and this isn't trying to be critical of anybody because I'd be myself, it's the messenger. Now let me explain why I say this. Interestingly, during the COVID crisis, and I talked about the implementation of broadband. And one of the reasons we did that, and Tina May is my chief of staff, she's over here, and she was running point on this, is the recognition that rural hospitals had shut down and that there was going to be a crisis, and where were they going to go? And there was no access to doctors, and so what is that going to look like and for basic health care? So she reached over to the Mayo Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic, and we wrote letters to governors, and we said we need a variance for an ability to write prescriptions and to see doctors and have the reimbursement rates be similar to seeing a doctor in person, and have it be legal and have them be able to write a prescription without seeing somebody in person because of the COVID crisis. We need that variance. And that happened. And what we heard from the Mayo, and this goes to my point on the messenger, they said, do you know how many times we've asked for that? And I fear when industry is asking for itself, it's almost as like, well, of course, you're at the Land-Grant University, you're out here for money, versus what the clear message is. So this is why I also say we need other voices that react with urgency about the critical nature of this. We need other partners on this journey, because otherwise, again, it's us yelling at each other like, can you believe they don't understand this? And I think that was such a profound experience for us and learning that here they had been fighting this battle for years and could not get approval. And it took the folks who were going to be most impacted, the community, to write the letter and to get that to happen. And yes, there was a crisis there, but it was even before it had moved into the rural areas. So that's what, I don't know that it's a change in message. I fear I don't want to wait till there's a food crisis here in the United States. Right now there is a food security issue because of the high costs, and I've done articles, I've done interviews saying, you want to reduce the price of food, have some immigration reform, control the controllables. We are big believers in trying to control the controllables. That would be one of them. But I do believe we need to consider who are the messengers that can help us make this clear with others.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, my name's Kirsten Heiberger. I'm a Kasner student here at UNL studying environmental studies and energy science. My question goes back to what you were saying a little earlier about the impending need we're going to have to increase the food production around the world to meet the population that is coming. And UN statistics put food waste globally at 1/4 to 1/3 of all of the food that's produced goes to waste. Here in Lincoln, we have a program called FoodNet that actually is a completely volunteer-run organization. They go and collect food from restaurants and grocery stores and then distribute it at different sites for free. But that's just one small volunteer-run program in one small city. So I'm just curious what part reducing food waste plays in meeting that global demand to feed people.
I think it's a central part. I mean, in emerging markets, it's post-harvest waste, and they lack refrigeration, they lack all quality standards, and so that's where the waste occurs. Here in the United States, we overbuy, and we have waste and goods that get goods that are unused, if you will. I think it is an important component of this whole discussion. And we do need to have more investment against that in terms of our messaging, but also here domestically, but also internationally. We need to talk about what are the quality standards or implementations that we need to have, refrigeration, whatever it might be, that will help post-harvest waste. And I do think that would be a significant benefit.
All right, that concludes the time that we have allotted for this discussion. So please join me in thanking Beth for the insightful discussion.
Okay, Beth, before you head off, thank you so much. This is a Heuermann medal, and thanks, just a small token of our appreciation for today. Absolutely.
Freebies. You bet. I said it's not even a hat. We like it.
Some of us need hats.